Welcome to a conversation on best practices for engaging with refugee leaders. We're going to wait a few minutes as people trickle in, give you an opportunity to settle in a bit from your long day at work, and we will begin shortly. Thank you. For those of you who are just joining us, we will begin in just a few minutes to allow other attendees to join us as well. Thank you. Thanks everyone for logging in and joining us. We will wait another minute before we start our conversation this evening. So thank you again for joining us. While we're waiting, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves into the chat and what state you are joining us from, as well as the organization that you're joining us from. Thank you. Please enter your name. Thank you, Connor Flynn from Maryland. Thank you, Kathy. How are you? From Buffalo, New York. Thanks for joining us. Mary from Virginia. We have Don Lam from Cambodia Cultural Center of North Carolina. Thank you for joining. Peggy from Colorado, my home state. Thank you. Refugee International DC. Thank you. City and County of Denver from Colorado. Thank you. Please feel free. Don't be shy. Drop your name, your organization, say hello, give us a shout. Okay, we will begin in just a couple of seconds. Thank you everyone for dropping your info into the chat. We certainly appreciate that. I think we'll go ahead and start. I think we'll go ahead and begin. If we can, thank you so much. Well, I want to welcome you all this evening for this very important and timely conversation. I'm Na Vung Sandoval. I'm the Refugee Congress Honorary Delegate, as well as the United States Refugee Advisory Board Project Manager with Refugee Congress. And to this conversation, I also want to add that I'm a refugee from Vietnam. So today's event is based on the launch of Best Practices for Engaging with Refugee Leaders guide. And we will now drop a link into the chat so that the audience can access the guide either now or later on. And this guide, it's important to know that it was spearheaded and it was collaborated by Refugee Congress, Church World Service, and the Refugee Advocacy Lab. But it was created by refugee leaders for allies in the field and to our community at large. Why was it created? So for too long, people who have experienced displacement have been absent from the policy tables and also from decision-making that impacts our lives and our communities. Today, that fortunately is increasingly changing as advocates, policymakers, members of the media, and others are being more proactive in collaborating with us, with those who are impacted by the most and refugee leaders. So we welcome this development and we are very excited. I had a chance to look at the guide. it is so spot on with the things that are talked about, some of the pointers in order for you to have an effective collaboration and partnership with us. But even though we're enthusiastic, we want to ensure that these engagements are rooted in equal and meaningful partnership. This new guide and our discussion today will give you a roadmap of best practices for engaging with refugee leaders. Advice like working with refugee leaders from the beginning, not bringing us in towards the end. And also not bringing it in to just rubber stamp something or just provide some feedback after the most critical and important stage of the planning process has already been completed. And ensuring that you collaborate with refugee leaders on questions you may ask us during a panel discussion like this one, or how our stories might be used when they're being recorded. So from my personal experience, I can tell you right now, I have had some wonderful interactions and collaborations with communities who are non-refugees, who are non-displaced members of our community. And I've also had some very horrible, less than positive experiences as well. And I can tell you the positive experiences continues to this day. Our engagement is meaningful. And most importantly, the results from our collaboration is meaningful, because these sorts of aspects that we are directing you to and suggesting in this guide, like I said, it is so accurate, and it has been something that we have all thought about. So it's there for you now to access and to use generously during your collaboration with us. So you'll be hearing from refugee leaders today, including Adamu, Dauda, and Myra, who I have so much respect for. And I'm so happy to see that we're all in the same space, because they'll be sharing with you their perspectives and their very important narratives of some of the things that they've witnessed and experienced to enhance the conversation today. So finally, I want to give a warm welcome, and you should also give a warm welcome to moderator Adamu Mohammed. He's the Associate Director of Grassroots Organizing at Church World Service. So let's go ahead and get started. Adamu.
All right, thank you so much now for this wonderful overview of why we're here. And good evening to everyone. And thank you for joining us this evening on Monday, May the 16th. And for us to have a deep conversation into best practices for engaging with refugee leaders. And I'm really proud of all our panel today, and including you now for being part of this program. Just for us to get started, a quick housekeeping. Again, this session is being recorded, and this session, we're going to make it as conversational as possible. We want to make sure that we have the best out of this conversation that we're going to have today. And with me, I have panelists, which are made of two wonderful, amazing leaders that most of you probably know or have interacted with or have engaged with in the past or recently. So the way this session will work, we'll ask some questions to the panelists about their experience with regards to the content of this guide. And then towards the end, we will have time for questions from the audience. And also, if time permits, we'll also hear from someone who has done amazing work in putting together this guide itself, Dagmawit, later on. So I want to start by introducing our panelists. Again, starting with Dauda Sise, if you and Myra Dagepau, those are our two panelists for this evening. So welcome, Dauda, welcome, Myra. And we just want to have you introduce yourselves, maybe your name, your role within the community, and what you do professionally, and how you've been involved in this work, advocating, speaking, sharing your stories, engaging with allies and partners, and advocacy for refugee issues. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourselves, and want to start with you, Dauda.
Good evening or good afternoon. It depends which part of the country you are. But I greet you all in my humble way. And I want to thank the organizer of this event, Refugee Congress, Refugee International, and all our meaningful partners that have put this event today. And also, Adamu, thank you so much for cheerleading this event and for your wonderful introduction. My name is Dauda Sise, and I'm originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa. And as we all know, I resettled in the United States in 2009 due to the terrible war that happens in my home country. And that war was terrible enough. I lost my dad and my sister in the war. And I got airlifted and stayed in a refugee camp for over 10 years before finally resettled in the United States. While I was in the refugee camp, during that time, the condition was very terrible. No education for youth. I think it is echoing. I don't know.
I think we can hear you.
Okay. No education for youth. And for the kids, and I advocate for kids and in the advocacy space. And by the time I left there, we had school for the children. Here in the United States, I co-founded the Louisiana Organization for Refugees and Immigrants, an organization that amplifies the voices of refugees. That's so funny, right? Refugee Congress also, I'm the Vice Chair for Refugee Congress Board of Director, and recently I transitioned as the National Network Director for African Communities Together, championing the African Immigrant Legislative Forum, a national space that is bringing African refugees and immigrants together to build collective power. So this is short of my journey and that getting me to this space. I will pass it back on to you, Adamu. Thank you.
Thank you, Dauda, so much for quickly introducing yourselves. And we really appreciate you being here. Myra?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, organizers, as well as participants for joining us today. Hey, it's Monday evening and you're not tired yet, so thank you. Well, my name is Mara Dagipo, Refugee Congress delegate from the state of Virginia, a former a former IDP, internally displaced person, and a refugee from Burma. And I've been doing advocacy in my own little way since I was like 13, seeing unfair in my own community and knowing that it is not fair and I have to do something about it. Of course, at the age of 13, what did I know? Aside from knowing what is not right. But of course, it takes me all this time and up to this life, I realize, yes, when there's unfair, it means that there are perpetrators that we have to put into rest and hold them accountable. So yes, I've been doing advocacy stuff for a long enough time and I'm still doing it. So prior to joining Refugee Congress, I was also working, doing advocacy at the UN for some years, and then moving to Washington, DC, again, doing advocacy. And finally, right now with UUSC, Unitarian Universalist Service Committee as a senior program officer, still doing advocacy. So all in all, I wanted to say that, yes, we need to raise the voices of those who don't have the capacity we have. And that is the best place where we are right now. So we just have to continue doing what we are doing best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myra, also for this wonderful introduction. And this is a good place for us to kind of jump into the conversation that we're having. For some of us who are were not probably privy to this, the publication of this guide. It was made live on May 5th. And so if you haven't read it yet, please take time to read it after today's session, maybe later this evening or tomorrow, but it has some wonderful pointers and guidance for our friends, allies, and advocates. So as you said, I think Myra, during your introduction, like the work you're doing in the community, is very important. And so the work that you're doing, Dauda. And we do know that impacted communities drive social change. And centering impacted leaders' voice and their stories is a powerful step toward that social change that we're all aspiring to. But sometimes, allies, partners, organizations that work alongside refugees, often with good intention, but those intentions are sometimes misaligned when they're engaging with refugee with lived experience. So what I mean by that is that, allies sometimes take over the situation because they think, not all, but most or some think what's best for a situation, and which sometimes results in perpetuating power imbalances and also does not give equal access to decision-making for those that they're making decisions for. So this guide comes at the right time. And I hope that we will be able to, during our conversation, we'll be able to highlight some of it and also further educate our partners and allies. So the first question I wanted to pose to both of you, starting with you, Dauda, if you can talk about, just a little bit your experience as refugee leader, collaborating with organizations and allies in decisions that impact you and your community. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and what are some of the takeaways that you had from those engagements with organizations and allies? And what do you think is the best practice for engagement with allies, and what needs to be done better? We'll start with you, Dauda.
Thank you so much for the wonderful questions, and I know I can take the whole day to answer those questions because based on the experience with allies, but I was just trying to be very, very brief. So one thing I just wanted to make clear is when you call a refugee, we are impacted people that have experienced the worst humanitarian catastrophe that we ever experienced. And inviting refugees or collaborating with refugees, and as an allies, one of the best practices you have to acknowledge and know the individual that you're about to talk with, knowing what their individual has gone through. Always have that back of your mind. So whenever you channel your conversation and your questioning, have that in mind. And don't use refugee story as a way for you to sell your programs or to make money out of it. Because refugees are telling the pain, something they are not proud of once we narrate our story. So good practice to do is, number one, try to understand where this person is coming from and what they have experienced. Secondly, be compassionate when they share their story, and then be that source of console to them, because when somebody's sharing a story, they're trying to heal from their past, and don't make that healing become worse. Try to help in the healing process. A simple word like thank you so much for sharing your story. And if there is anything that is wrong or you need help, count on me for your support. Or a simple question like, if there is anything that you need help with, we are here. So try to make it personal and connect with that individual. And one thing I just want to add, I'll close with it. When you hear a refugee telling their story, and one of the mistakes to me personally that I've discovered is don't say, oh my goodness, your story is great. Your story is powerful. There is nothing great in that traumatic situation that individuals share. There is nothing great in that. So do not use those phrases because that individual does not share your story to get any credit out of it. It is a vulnerable space they are in, and they have to relive that dangerous experience back again and again and again. So the best thing you can do, if it's just a hug or a thank you or just a connections. So that is where I just wanted to stop. Thank you, Adamu.
Thank you, Dauda. Those are great perspectives and observations that you mentioned when it comes to engaging with refugee leaders. So Myra, just along the same question that I posed to Dauda, refugee leadership, having refugees being involved at the beginning of any process of decision making, especially when the decision is going to be made about them. So can you share, same question, but like how important it is to make sure that refugee leaders are engaged in the process of decision making at the very beginning, not at the end when their stories are needed? Some of the things that Dauda mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, think about it this way. Who are the refugees? Am I the refugee, or you who are working with me is a refugee? So who would tell a refugee story better than a refugee themselves? So in that sense, if you are engaging with me, then it means that you need my expertise because I am the expert in the refugee issues. And therefore, I would suggest that, yes, you certainly engage with the refugee leaders at the very beginning stage. And this is what I used to say to some of the refugee resettlement agencies before even they bring the refugees into the country, especially the newcomers. They've never been into the country, and a lot of them, they've never seen an airplane, let alone having been put in the center of New York City. So for them, where to stay is very important, who they have to be staying close to, who they can go for help, what language, all this stuff is very important. So before you make a decision to lay out something or thinking about something that is going to be very helpful to the refugees, for the refugees, perhaps come to the refugees leaders and ask them what would be a better way of arranging these things for the refugees. And I totally agree with Dauda earlier, find out about where they come from and their stories and all this stuff. And I really wanted to suggest that everyone who works with the refugees should know the refugee stories. Cultural orientation is very important because if we don't know the story of the person or the people, for instance, the people of Burma, they don't usually talk back. And then whenever you talk to them, they just smile at you. But deep down there, how much they scare of the police, because in Burma, you don't see the police, you only see the Burmese military. And the moment you heard about Burmese military, you already wanted to run. So all these cultural layers that put in place already make them scared. So yes. And I wanted to give another example.
Yeah.
Right. when putting refugees at a certain place and at a certain situation, again, if we can talk to the refugee leaders, that'll be very helpful. For instance, back before, I used to, when I was still living in New York City, and I tried to interact with refugees in New Jersey states, in Camden, in Trenton, in Elizabeth, and all these places. Camden is one of the worst crime places in the state of New Jersey, and the refugees are put there, and they don't even know how to get around. And I ended up having the opportunity to talk to one of the higher authority here in DC. And then for some reason, they've talked behind, and then they ended up closed down one of the offices. My point is not to close down the offices, but to make it better. And so all I'm trying to say is that these people need our help. So to our best ability, we have to help them, not to just tick off the boxes, but also thinking about what we are arranging is going to be beneficial, or is it going to be just a waste?
Wow, yeah, those are very important points that you are both making. I mean, Doda said something earlier, but I will come back to that because it will be part of our second question. So I want to just follow up with say this question on refugee leadership. Oftentimes we see where partners or allies have a program or do a research or are setting the agenda for a policy, advocacy, or an event, and then it's towards the end of that refugee leaders are invited to come and just speak to the audience. So how important it is for us, for refugees, and for our allies to explain the full purpose and strategy of what they're doing and why they're doing that event, for example, or that advocacy policy work from the beginning and in partnership with refugees. How important it is to have refugee leadership during that process, even before anything is started. I want to go with you, Myra, and then we'll go to Doda, just briefly.
Of course, it is important. If you're talking to people like Doda or myself, maybe it is not really, you don't really need to take a whole lot of time to explain because we are in the circle. So we are pretty used to, right? But if you're bringing somebody, a refugee leader that has never done advocacy, let alone policy and all this stuff, then yes, you're going to have to educate them. This is what it is, how useful it is, how do you do it, and what could be the outcome, is how long it is going to take for this piece of policy to take effect. All this stuff will be important, but also at the same time, as much as we wanted to give them hope, we also don't want to give them the false hope. And that is why it is always important to explain to the extent that they understand. And perhaps some of the times they may have follow-up questions. Perhaps some of the times they will sit and look at you like they understand. But bear in mind, like I said again, in the Burmese culture, a lot of times people are quiet. Doesn't mean that they understand everything. So maybe you wanted to be a little more proactive, making sure that they understand your point. That'll be very helpful.
That's true. Yeah, cultural differences, cultural sensitivity. Dauda, what do you think? How important it is to make sure that refugee leadership is at the forefront of any strategy that partners or allies are putting forward?
Thank you so much. And that's a very, 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 very good questions. Number one, a refugee at the forefront, we have the lived experience. We are the masters of what is directly impacting us. Nobody has known. So if you think that you know it better than me and you don't include me and refugees, and then you just put a policy, you said, hey, we're done, go take over this. And so many times it has happened, but in as much as we're able to deliver, But we ask ourselves this question, why we are not at the table where the decision we are made, why we are always placed on the menu. And we are not even placed on the top of the menu, we are placed at almost the bottom of the menu, where it's hard to find. But at the end of the day, we will come and clean up everything. So it is high time that refugee leaders have meaningful participation at the table, um, meaningful participation, and be at the table where the decisions are made. If you want to organize an advocacy event, start with refugees, organizer, refugee leaders. We know for a fact what the community is experiencing, what people are asking for on the ground, what we need as a community. Then we can discuss with the organization, the institution that serve refugee. If we collaborate together, we're definitely gonna get a win.
Okay. Thank you. So those are great points. And I think something you said earlier, just going back to healing from their past, not making it worse when it comes to refugee telling their story. So I wanted us to kind of talk about this a little bit, because we know telling stories of displacement is often like re-traumatizing for many of us, for especially those who have lived, who have gone through those traumatic experiences, particularly refugees. So the question to you, we'll start with Myra this time. How can we make sure that partners, allies are respecting boundaries safely and respecting safety as well? Because sometimes, people's lives may still be in jeopardy, particularly if a refugee here has family members left behind that could be in situations that may lead them to be in harm's way because of their loved one being engaged here, advocating. And also, it's very important that when engaging refugees to tell their stories, that engagement is in a trauma-informed storytelling format or model. So how can we make sure that partners are respecting those boundaries? How can we make sure that partners are respecting the safety of those that they're asking to tell their stories? And how can we make sure that partners are engaging in a trauma-informed storytelling? Myra?
I'd say that as much as we want somebody to tell their story, I agree. Bear in mind that maybe that pain is still very fresh. I myself, a lot of times, I still dream of fleeing. And all of a sudden I figure when I fall on the floor because of that nightmare. So having to tell one story is not easy at all. When I started off at the very first time, it was so painful. I cried almost every time I did public speaking. Seriously. But also that's at the same time, because I understand the value of telling my story, which is very painful, but at the same time, I took it as a healing process for me because I get to let out that feeling. And I also understand that because of my personal story that I tell, that can connect myself with my audience, and my audience also can connect with the people that I serve, the community and the people back home who are still suffering the brutality of the Burmese military. For me, because I understand the whole circle, so it's easier to have to go through this. Although it was still very painful and is still very painful. So I think if we are to approach these people, we do have to making sure that they understand the value, the meaning of what we're trying to ask them to do, but also at the same time, bear in mind that we also ensure them that your story is safe with us if you don't want us to get it out. Or if you wanted to get it out, this is where you can also get it out. But you are not pushed or you are not forced to do so.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Dauda, what do you think?
Thank you so much. First and foremost is when you invite refugees to tell their story, do not have a pre um a premeditated ideas before you even listen to the refugees. Don't form your own ideas, or don't form what you wanted to hear or what you want that individual to tell. All you have to do is create a safe and a friendly environment where this individual will come and be themselves in a very, very vulnerable place. Trust me, it is vulnerable. I'll give one typical example. At one point, I was interviewed, and then I was talking about my story, and then this individual make it political and ask me, "Okay, you're talking about refugee. Be the former president has been the chief um the chief president that has deported so many immigrants, which is completely further from what I was convinced and the conversation. So you just have to be mindful. If you don't have anything else to say to console that individual, then it's good to be silent. Secondly, as well, so many times this is going to the resettlement agency. It's not just because you say engaging refugees, it's not just telling the story. Because every day that refugee walk into any institution at the resettlement center or the place, they carry that with us. We carry it with us everywhere I go. My experience has carried with us. So sometimes have meaningful conversation with refugee you are resettling, and some of the things that they need and you want to provide. It goes a long way in helping that individual in the healing process. One big example, like when we came, like I'm a caseworker that I want a DVD set. They got out of the money they gave me, they purchased that. And because of that purchase, a caseworker got in trouble in a workplace where it is surprisingly that, okay, this is what I need, but the resettlement agency determined what I should get. So that in itself is not a very good practice as a resettlement agency when you engage refugees. So all I'm saying is we just have to create a friendly environment where refugees are heard and listened to.
Mm. Thank you so much, both of you, Dauda and Myra. And I think the guide does provide more information for folks, or guidance towards making sure that folks that we ask to share their stories are doing so in a very safe and trauma healing way. That's very important. And so, folks, we have someone very important that I would love to ask to say a few words. Degmawit Kebede, a former Refugee Congress Advocacy and Communication Associate, and the leader in driving the creation of this guide. She was very instrumental, and she's on this session today. And would love to have Dagmawit share with us even why this guide came into play and what are some of the things that drove her to even start talking about creating this guide. Dagmawit, if you want to unmute yourself and probably share some few words.
Hi, Adam. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Dagmar Kabeda. I'm a derivative asylee from Ethiopia. And as Adam mentioned, I've worked with Refugee Congress, CWS, and also the lab. And I think I want to start off by saying thank you to the panelists, Dauda and Myra, and also Adamu for this conversation. I think that everything that was shared and spoken on is, it shows why this guide is needed, and it also allows for people to really take the guide into practice. And really my idea while I was drafting this guide stemmed from wanting to just create a resource for organizations and media and policymakers and allies to really be intentional in how they choose to engage with refugee and immigrant communities. I think Myra covered it best. She said, who better to share our stories and to make decisions for us than, refugees ourselves. And I think that really is the starting point, is to really highlight the gap that exists in terms of how people to choose to do this work. I think intentionality and care and compassion goes such a long way. And if as allies and organizers and organization, if our work is to serve refugee and immigrant communities, then there's no better way to do it than starting with refugee leadership, continuing it with refugee leadership, and also ending it with refugee leadership, because I think that allows for the products and the work that we do to be effective. It's useful for the community and it's centered in what they need. And that is, I think, the main purpose of why a lot of organizations exist, the reason why we do our work. And so taking a step back and seeing it that way really allows it to be more effective. And I also think that, this is a guide, it's a beginning, it's a step. It doesn't mean that, every single step, or if you practice that, then the work, making sure that, refugees are centered and the decision-making is completed. As, Dauda and Myra have shared, every refugee has different expertise, different needs, different experiences, and taking a pause and centering them in every work that you do as individuals is a really great starting point, because that allows for it to be really authentic and true to every experience and to what is needed. And so I think really, like I said, the really main point of it is for it to be more of a structural change with an organization as individuals, from the leadership aspect to the bottom, of whether that be including refugees from the beginning in decision making, or hiring refugees within organizations and making sure that they're a part of it every time, and not just when we're looking for a refugee to speak at a World Refugee Day event, but it's part of how our organization functions. It's part of how our organizations work, and really making sure that that is the way it's done. And so I also really want to thank you, the lab and Refugee Congress and CWS, for putting this guide together and supporting this guide and also hosting this webinar, because it really is instrumental. And I think that this is the first step in making sure that, we're making this change structurally and personally in our lives as well.
Wow, that is important. That's very powerful. Thank you so much, Dagmawit, for starting this idea, and know that we love you and we still miss you. So folks, we've got to 7:45 and it's time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, if there are questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. And if you feel like unmuting yourselves, you can. I don't know if that's possible, but we already have a question. And I will go ahead and ask our panelists. So the question, Dauda and Myra, is how do we ensure we are engaging with diverse refugee leaders and creating a safe intercultural space for all of them? So how do we ensure that we are engaging with diverse refugee leaders in a very safe and space for all of them?
I'll go first. Thank you, Adamu, for the one that asked the questions. It's a very good question. First place to start is, for now, we have a unique national organization, which is Refugee Congress. Get to our website, refugeecongress.org. And if you want to engage nationally with refugee leaders are diverse, and then you can see that at each state we are growing to have delegates in each state. So you will connect with those delegates, and those delegates, they are very active within their states in which they engage. And currently we have about 30 countries represented in our delegate pool right now. So that's diversity for national. Locally is be a change agent. Be a change agent. Take the time, look for the resettlement agency, volunteers there, and get to know the refugees that live within your neighborhood, within your communities. Get to know them. Get to know them. And one thing I'm just gonna say is once you know them, try your best, your very best to learn how to pronounce their name. Because that is the first. Yeah, try the very best to learn how to pronounce our name. Just like how most of the names here, they are very difficult for us, but we learned it. So that is one way. As well, just pass. So next, and I'm gonna pass it back to you.
Myra, thank you so much, Dauda. I think one thing you said about making sure people learn how to say our name, and that's very, very important. Myra, what do you think? How do we ensure that we're engaging diverse refugee leaders in a safe intercultural space for all of them?
I totally agree with Dauda. Start off with Refugee Congress. We are all across the country. If one person doesn't have the connection with the group you wanted to have communication with, we're going to have somebody in our group that will be able to direct you. And that person also will be able to also perhaps brief you in terms of the background, the culture of the person that you probably might want to meet up, so that you understand a bit more of where that person comes from. What are the things that is okay and not okay, for instance. And so, yeah, start off with Refugee Congress. That is what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah, and by the way, this question came from Chelsea Barrera. Just want to make sure I acknowledge that person asking that question. Yeah, and then we have another question when it comes to, I think you probably answered this question about how do we boost the voices of refugees in our community in a way that is respectful of their boundaries and also the trauma of them sharing their experience.
I think we did earlier, but I also wanted to add on a little bit is that sometimes some people like to exaggerate things, or sometimes they wanted to add on some ideas. And I think sometimes it might be okay, but I would prefer, if this is my story, then I wanted it to be told the way I want it to be told. I think that is a very important way of we show respect to the person that we're working with. Because I've seen sometimes some people trying to change the person's story because, like we said earlier, like premeditated, right? So we're trying to, some people try to change the story of that person slightly, which is sometimes, I don't like it. If it is my story, no.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it doesn't make it authentic and it's not representative. And it's also, when people say tokenizing, like you're always trying to use somebody's story for your own agenda, and you have to make it more than what it is, which is not right and which is not respectful of that person's experience. So I definitely agree with you on that. And we have another question, which talks about what resources can organizations provide to better engage refugee leaders, and where should those organizations invest their efforts? So the first part of the question, what resources can an organization provide to better engage refugee leaders?
Thank you so much. resources to better engage that for the audience. We already started it. That's a very good start. We have the 10 best practices for engaging with refugee leader. Take the time to read it. And as you are reading the 10 practices, always have at the back of your mind that what is behind written this. And I want to thank Dagmawit and the team that put this together. And it's not like something they just come out with. It is a testament of every refugee experience and some of their personal experience, community members' experience, refugee within Refugee Congress experience, and they compile these practices. It might not be a one size fits all, but just the beginning. And secondly, as well, for integrations, for you as a leader, help refugees. Once you master that practice, you too play your own role, how you can help those newcomer integrate into society, into life, as life in the community, because your support and your help plays significant role in adjusting to life in within that community. And thirdly, thirdly, please see refugee as a normal human being. Don't this is my own resources. I'm just passing on to you now. Yeah, once you get to know refugee, you get to know us, and that's my own resources. See us as just normal human being like you see in any place. Don't look at us any less. Just look at us as normal. Don't see refugee as super vulnerable. In as much as our story takes us in a vulnerable place, but we are value-added people. We are entrepreneur. We have enormous skills. Some of the refugee you're seeing coming in, some of them are like trained doctors. They are engineers. Unfortunately, because of the educational rules, they cannot practice it here. But those are things you have to take into consideration and how you can play a role to make sure that you identify the refugee skills and see how you can help them transition to the skills they already got while they were back in their home country.
Yes, absolutely. And I know we're getting close to time, so I want to keep us moving on the agenda. I mean, these are great questions, and the response, that you're hearing from the leaders are very much important. One thing I also want to add, as we get closer to ending this conversation, is that in addition to Refugee Congress, like there are other organizations, and we encourage you to get involved with other organizations and coalitions that are doing this important work, leadership development for refugees, asylees, organizations like Opportunity for All campaign, Table, Church World Service, Leadership Development Program, that kind of build this pipeline of refugees that are now attaining amazing work across our network and a part of this Refugee Congress delegation that we have across the country. So there's work going on in coalition. But before we go, I also want to make sure that we give the audience maybe a time for them to kind of share what they learn from hearing from our leaders. What are some of the action items? What are some of the things that they're going to be doing, having heard from our panelists today and from for the Mawit and from Na as well. So if you think you have something that you want to share, how you will engage with refugee leaders going forward from what you've learned today, feel free to raise your hand and or let us know what you want to say. If you can unmute yourself, that would be even better. Do we have anyone from our audience, ally, that want to share a takeaway from this conversation? Okay, well, if you cannot speak, I think I'm seeing something. Thank you. I think going forward, I will definitely be reaching out to Refugee Congress. Awesome. So the audience cannot speak because of the webinar version. So that's from, Farjam is the one that is saying that they will reach out to Refugee Congress going forward, which is great. And that's what we want to see. We want to see how you are going to be, if this is really helpful, this guide that we provide and what you heard today have been very helpful for you. So feel free, thumbs up, let us know in the comment section how you feel from the conversation that we've had today. Some are suggesting that we should share this in the native language of the person speaking. So yeah, the stories that we share are sometimes in English. Sometimes not everybody is able to speak English, but people can tell their story in their native language. And I think that would be a great way to provide that. So with that said, I think we have reached the end of our conversation. I know there is plenty to talk about, but I think this is the beginning of a long conversation that we will have as leaders in this movement, as allies and partners going forward. And that is all thanks to this guide that we have out there now that will definitely be very helpful. So panelists, I think we have for 1 minute each, if you can, maybe 30 seconds. As we finish this webinar, what are some of the top takeaways you want to make sure that the audience live with today? Just 30 seconds. If you want to each share. Myra, I want to go to you.
I just want to say that the refugees are a part of us. They are the productive citizens of the United States of America. So let us treat them as ourselves because they are as valuable as us. And so whatever help that they need, we also support them and help them in any way we can without thinking about different kinds of implication or things that we will lose, because there's nothing to lose. They are the ones who make our lives better. So
yes, thank you. Dauda, last
Yeah,
word.
thank you. I know I've seen through the chat, everyone say impressive event and they're inspired. Please, I just want you to turn that inspiration and that compassion, turn it into action. The Refugee Resettlement Program is at a crossroad. That institution has been damaged within the last 4 years. And now it's going to take all of us to rebuild that institutions. So for refugees to resettle peacefully and honorably, we all have a role to play. One is let advocate for equitable pathway to protections. There is no color in someone seeking safety.
Yes.
Everybody that is seeking safety should be given that chance and opportunity to seek safety, regardless of your color and country of origin.
Okay.
Secondly, let's urge the administration. Please, our panelists, pass this on to your colleagues, to your network, so that the refugee resettlement should be protected and reinvest in their resettlement. Thank you all.
Wow. So, folks, it's 8 p.m. I mean, we can still go on another hour, but so I want to thank everyone that make this session, today's webinar possible. Thank you all. And because this guide is out there to be used. So please share this guide with your network, share with your friends, share with your faith community, your allies, all the sponsors that we're engaging with. Remember, refugee leaders are leaders. That's why they sought refuge, because they just need the tool, they need the respect. We need to build relationships to be able to know who they are, and looking at refugees from the position of strength, not from their weaknesses, I think is very important. With that, I will thank you all and wish you a very good evening, and hope to see you soon in another space. Have a wonderful evening, everybody, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.